In the heart of South Carolina's Lowcountry, where Spanish moss drapes ancient oak trees and generations of families have built their legacies, one name has commanded respect and wielded power for over a century. That name is Murdaugh. But what happens when a dynasty built on law and order becomes the center of a criminal investigation that reads like something straight out of a crime thriller? Welcome to the Murdaugh Mysteries, where privilege meets peril, and where the very family that once upheld justice now finds itself at the center of multiple deaths, financial scandals, and a web of secrets that continues to unravel with each passing day. For more than 100 years, the Murdaugh family controlled the legal landscape of this quiet corner of South Carolina. 3 generations served as solicitors, essentially the chief prosecutors for the region. They didn't just practice law, they were the law. Their influence stretched far beyond the courtroom, touching every aspect of life in Hampton County and beyond. But empires, no matter how powerful, can crumble, and when they do, the fall is often spectacular. Our story begins not with the family's rise to power, but with its dramatic descent into chaos. It starts on a February night in 2019 when 6 young friends decided to spend an evening partying on the water. What should have been a fun night out would instead become the first domino to fall in a series of events that would expose decades of alleged corruption, cover-ups, and tragedy. The evening started innocently enough. Paul Murdaugh, the 19-year-old son of prominent attorney Alex Murdaugh, gathered 5 friends for what was meant to be a typical night of teenage rebellion. They met at the family's river house on a private island, a testament to the wealth and privilege that surrounded the Murdaugh name. But this wasn't just any teenager hosting a party. Paul carried the weight of a family legacy that had shaped this region for generations. His great-grandfather, grandfather, and father had all been lawyers. The family name opened doors, commanded respect, and as we would later learn, provided a sense of untouchability that would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. The group included Connor Cook, his cousin Anthony Cook, Anthony's girlfriend Mallory Beach, and 2 other friends. All were underage, and all had been drinking. Paul had used his older brother Buster's identification to purchase beer earlier that evening, a detail that would later become significant as investigators pieced together the events of that tragic night. Around 8 in the evening, they boarded the family's boat and headed to a party at a house along the river. The night progressed as many do for young people with too much freedom and too little supervision. They drank, they laughed, they enjoyed the privilege of youth and wealth. But as the hours ticked by, alcohol consumption increased and tensions began to rise. Just after midnight, the group decided to head toward downtown Beaufort. Paul and Connor wanted to visit a local bar. Despite being underage, video footage from that evening would later show some members of the group appearing heavily intoxicated, their judgment clearly impaired by alcohol and the reckless confidence of youth. By 1:15 in the morning, they were back on the water, heading home. But what should have been a simple boat ride became something far more dangerous. According to witness statements, Paul was driving erratically, performing donuts in the water, his behavior becoming increasingly aggressive and unpredictable. The other passengers grew frightened. They begged Paul to slow down, to let someone else drive, to simply let them off the boat. But Paul refused, in depositions given later. Witnesses described a young man drunk on both alcohol and power, convinced of his own invincibility. Mallory Beach, just 19 years old, was terrified. She had her whole life ahead of her, dreams of the future, people who loved her. But on that February night, her fate became tied to the reckless decisions of someone who believed he was above consequences. The boat's navigation system would later provide investigators with a detailed timeline of those final moments. At 2:20 in the morning, the device recorded the boat slowing down and then suddenly speeding up again. Seconds later, it came to an abrupt stop when it struck a bridge piling at Archer's Creek. The impact was devastating. 5 of the 6 passengers survived, though several were seriously injured. But Mallory Beach was nowhere to be found. She had been thrown from the boat into the dark, cold water, and despite immediate search efforts, she had vanished. For 8 agonizing days, search teams scoured the waterways. Volunteers came from neighboring states to help look for the missing teenager. Her family held on to hope, praying for a miracle that would never come. Finally, 2 volunteer searchers found Mallory's body about 5 miles downstream from the crash site. The discovery devastated not just her family, but the entire community. Hundreds of people attended her funeral, a testament to the impact this young woman had made in her short life. Even members of the Murdaugh family attended, including Paul, the young man many believed was responsible for her death. But here's where the story takes a troubling turn, one that would set the stage for everything that followed. Despite clear evidence that Paul Murdaugh had been driving the boat while intoxicated, despite witness statements placing him at the wheel, despite his blood alcohol level being 3 times the legal limit hours after the crash, he was not immediately arrested. In fact, according to witnesses and court documents, Alex Murdaugh arrived at the hospital that night and seemed more concerned with damage control than with the tragedy that had just occurred. Hospital staff reported seeing him go from room to room, speaking with the other crash survivors, apparently trying to coordinate their stories. One security guard overheard a phone conversation where Alex allegedly said, "She's gone. Don't worry." These words would haunt Mallory's family, suggesting that instead of focusing on the search for the missing teenager, the family was already thinking about legal protection. Connor Cook later testified that while he was being treated for a broken jaw, Alex Murdaugh told him he didn't need to reveal who was driving the boat. The message was clear: protect Paul, regardless of the consequences. This wasn't just about a tragic accident anymore. This was about power, privilege, and the lengths to which a powerful family would go to protect one of their own. The Murdaugh name, which had commanded respect for over a century, was now being used as a shield against accountability. For nearly 2 months, as Mallory's family grieved and sought answers, Paul Murdaugh remained free. He wasn't arrested, wasn't charged, wasn't held accountable for the decision that had cost a young woman her life. The delay seemed to confirm what many in the community had long suspected, that the Murdaughs played by different rules than everyone else. The charges, when they finally came, arrived on what would have been Mallory's 20th birthday. Paul was charged with 3 felony counts, including boating under the influence causing death. But even then, the special treatment continued. He was never handcuffed during his arrest, never spent a single day in jail, and was released on a relatively modest bond. For Mallory's family, this wasn't justice. This was a continuation of a system that seemed designed to protect the powerful while ordinary people suffered the consequences. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit, hoping that civil court might provide the accountability that the criminal justice system seemed reluctant to deliver. But the Murdaugh story was far from over. In fact, the boat crash was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, as Paul's case slowly made its way through the legal system, other troubling questions began to emerge about the family's past. There was the mysterious death of Stephen Smith, a 19-year-old found dead on a rural road in 2015 under circumstances that didn't quite add up to the hit-and-run ruling. There were whispers about the family's housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, who had died after a fall at the Murdaugh estate, and questions about what happened to the insurance settlement from her death. Each revelation painted a picture of a family that had grown accustomed to operating outside the normal bounds of law and accountability. The very people who were supposed to uphold justice seemed to believe they were above it. But as we'll see, even the most powerful dynasties can't escape the consequences of their actions forever. The events set in motion by that tragic night in February 2019 would eventually bring down not just Paul Murdaugh, but the entire family empire. The stage was set for a reckoning that would shock South Carolina and capture the attention of the entire nation. What happened next would prove that, in the end, no one, not even the Murdaughs, is truly untouchable. The wheels of justice, as they say, grind slowly. But for the Murdaugh family, those wheels were about to pick up speed in ways no one could have anticipated. As Paul's case dragged through the legal system with no trial date in sight, life seemed to continue as normal for the young man who many believed had killed Mallory Beach. Paul was spotted at parties, driving boats, even getting speeding tickets while towing watercraft. To the outside world, it appeared that the Murdaugh name was once again providing protection from consequences. The family's influence seemed as strong as ever, their connections as deep as the roots of those ancient oak trees that lined their property. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. The civil lawsuit filed by Mallory's family was moving forward, and it would require depositions from all the boat crash survivors. For the first time, people would be forced to testify under oath about what really happened that night. The truth, so carefully managed and controlled, was about to become much harder to contain. The depositions revealed disturbing details about Paul's behavior that night. Witnesses described a young man completely out of control, violent and aggressive, drunk on both alcohol and the belief that his family name made him untouchable. His girlfriend at the time testified that he had slapped and spit on her during the boat ride, leaving the wheel repeatedly to fight with her before returning to continue driving. Connor Cook's testimony was particularly damaging. He revealed that Alex Murdaugh had essentially coached him at the hospital, suggesting he didn't need to tell investigators who was driving the boat. This wasn't just about protecting Paul anymore. It was about a systematic effort to obstruct justice. The depositions painted a picture of a family willing to use every tool at their disposal to avoid accountability. But as the civil case progressed, other questions about the Murdaugh family's past began to surface with increasing frequency. There was Stephen Smith, the 19-year-old nursing student whose body had been found on a remote country road back in 2015. The official ruling was a hit and run, but investigators at the scene had their doubts. There was no vehicle debris, no evidence of impact, and Stephen's shoes were still on his feet despite supposedly being struck by a moving vehicle. Stephen was openly gay in a small, conservative town, and rumors had circulated for years about his death being connected to the Murdaugh family. No concrete evidence had ever emerged, but the whispers persisted. Stephen's mother had always believed her son was murdered, that his death was somehow connected to his sexuality and to powerful people who wanted it covered up. Then there was Gloria Satterfield, the family's longtime housekeeper who had worked for the Murdaughs for over 20 years. In 2018, she had died after what was described as a trip and fall accident on the front steps of the family's hunting lodge. The same property where, 3 years later, Maggie and Paul would meet their own violent end. Gloria's death had been ruled natural, with no autopsy performed. But at her funeral, Alex Murdaugh had done something unusual. He approached Gloria's sons and suggested they file a wrongful death lawsuit against him. He even recommended a lawyer, his former college roommate and Paul's godfather. It seemed like a generous gesture from a wealthy employer, taking responsibility for an employee's accident on his property. But the reality was far more sinister. The insurance company paid out over $4 million in the wrongful death settlement. None of that money ever reached Gloria's family. It had allegedly disappeared into Alex Murdaugh's own pockets. As 2021 began, these various threads were still separate investigations, different cases with different victims, but they all seemed to orbit around the same family, the same name that had controlled this corner of South Carolina for over a century. The Murdaughs had weathered scandals before, had survived challenges to their power, but this time felt different. The pressure was building from multiple directions. The civil lawsuit in Mallory's case was forcing uncomfortable truths into the open. Questions about Stephen Smith's death were being raised with renewed vigor. Financial irregularities were beginning to surface at the family law firm. For Alex Murdaugh, the walls were closing in. The man who had spent his career as a prosecutor, who understood better than most how the legal system worked, could see the danger approaching. His son Paul was facing serious criminal charges that could result in significant prison time. The family's reputation, built over generations, was crumbling. But if Alex thought things couldn't get worse, he was tragically mistaken. On the evening of June 7, 2021, everything changed in the most devastating way possible. It was a typical summer evening in the Lowcountry. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of insects filled the darkness around the family's hunting lodge. Alex later told investigators he had spent the evening visiting his father, who was in the hospital. When he returned home around 10 that evening, he made a discovery that would forever alter the course of his life and his family's legacy. The frantic 911 call captured Alex's apparent panic and desperation. His voice cracked as he told the dispatcher he had found his wife and son shot to death near the dog kennels on the family property. Maggie, 52 years old and the mother of his children, was dead. Paul, just 22 and still awaiting trial for Mallory's death, was also gone. First responders arrived to find a scene of unimaginable violence. Both victims had been shot multiple times with different weapons. Maggie appeared to have been killed with a rifle, while Paul had been shot with a shotgun. The brutality of the murders shocked even experienced investigators. The timing seemed almost too coincidental to believe. Paul was scheduled to face trial for the boat crash that killed Mallory Beach. The civil lawsuit was progressing, threatening to expose years of alleged cover-ups and obstruction. Financial problems at the law firm were mounting, and now, suddenly, two of the key figures in these various controversies were dead. The investigation into the double murder immediately became a media sensation. Here was a story that had everything: wealth, power, privilege, family secrets, and now, shocking violence. National news outlets descended on the small community, turning the quiet Lowcountry into the center of a true crime phenomenon. Alex became the focus of intense scrutiny. As the surviving family member who had discovered the bodies, he was automatically a person of interest. His alibi, visiting his sick father at the hospital, would be thoroughly investigated. But alibis can be complicated things, especially for someone with the resources and connections that Alex Murdaugh possessed. The murders also raised uncomfortable questions about motive. Who would want to kill a mother and her son? Was this connected to Paul's upcoming trial? Was someone seeking their own form of justice for Mallory Beach's death? Or were there other, darker reasons behind the violence? Some speculated that Alex himself might be involved. The financial pressures, the legal troubles, the threat to the family's reputation, all could provide motive. Others suggested it might be connected to the boat crash, that someone had decided to take justice into their own hands. But there was another theory that would soon prove prophetic. What if the murders were connected to something even more sinister? What if they were part of a larger pattern of violence and deception that stretched back years? As investigators dug deeper into the Murdaugh family's history, they began to uncover a web of alleged financial crimes, cover-ups, and suspicious deaths that painted a picture far different from the respectable legal dynasty the family had portrayed for over a century. The double murder of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh wasn't just a shocking crime. It was the event that would finally bring down one of South Carolina's most powerful families. The investigation would reveal secrets that had been buried for years, expose corruption that had infected the very institutions meant to protect justice, and ultimately lead to consequences that no amount of money or influence could prevent. The Murdaugh dynasty, built over generations and seemingly unshakable, was about to face its final reckoning. And at the center of it all was Alex Murdaugh, the man who had once wielded the power of his family name like a shield, now finding himself defenseless against the storm he had helped create.